Swinney.
We will never turn our back on a single sport.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Planet Holyrood, the podcast discussing all the big news in Scottish politics. I'm Chris McCall. I'm the Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Record, and I'm standing in again as host this week while Paul Hutchin continues to enjoy his summer break in his back garden a long way away from the Daily Record offices in Glasgow. Now, joining me this week, we have Douglas Dickie, who's the content editor at the Scottish Daily Express, and I'm also joined by Mark Smith, who's the head of news at the Daily Record. Now, we're going to talk firstly this week about a man who is no stranger to this podcast, despite never appearing as a guest yet, and that's, of course, Donald Trump.
He's an avid listener.
I've heard that. Our sources in Washington do suggest that he tunes in every week. But by this time next week, the president could be on his way to Scotland for a whistle-stop visit of his luxury golf courses. And when not admiring the views of the offshore wind turbines from his many estate in Aberdeenshire, the US president has confirmed he will be meeting Keir Starmer in Aberdeen, and he'll also be finding the time to meet John Swinney. Now, we don't know where or when that meeting will be taking place, but the First Minister has confirmed he will be meeting Trump. I was speaking to the First Minister earlier on today, and he said he was looking forward to the meeting and said it was an opportunity to raise the issues that matter to Scotland with the President. Now, Dougie, how does John Swinney get this meeting right, and how important is it that he makes a positive impression on the President?
Well, I mean, it's very important. I think the main topic of conversation is probably going to be whiskey tariffs, I would imagine. And you know, it's such a huge industry here, so important to our economy. But I think John Swinney's biggest problem is, you know, how this looks within the Scottish nationalist movement, which has obviously traditionally been quite hostile to Donald Trump. The SNP have been quite hostile to Donald Trump. And now you've got the First Minister hobnobbing with Donald Trump while he's over here checking out his golf courses. I personally think it's right that Swinney has, you know, tried to get a meeting with him. I have no issue with it. He is, after all, the leader of Britain's biggest ally, the biggest superpower in the world. It's only natural that, you know, the leader of the devolved administration here in a country where Trump has many business interests, you know, they're going to have a lot to discuss. But I think Swinney's problem is that there are people who naturally would lean towards him who might be asking why he's meeting Donald Trump.
Well, the First Minister said today that he thought most Scots would expect that he would meet the President, and I think I kind of agree with that. But Mark, is this meeting actually going to change anything, or is it just going to be a photo opportunity?
I think it's important that Swinney does meet with Trump. I think it would be a terrible look if he turned round and made some sort of grandstanding Green Party-esque objection to Trump being here. I don't think that's really... I don't think it's Swinney's style apart from anything else, and I don't think it would be right for him to do it. But unlike yourself, Dougie, see, when he does meet him, he ought to be asking him a few tough questions. And I'm not saying that John Swinney putting Trump on the spot will change his view on anything, but I think it's important that if he's going to be in Scotland, he knows how the people of Scotland feel about Trump and his tariffs, about Trump and his racist take on immigration, about Trump and his unexplained wealth, that nobody knows how he's got the money to pay for these golf courses in Scotland. We've got the power, apparently, to have unexplained wealth orders imposed. We choose not to do it. I would like Swinney to raise some of these questions with Trump. And if he gets a black eye as a result, then we've got a very good story. But he ought to have the balls to raise these issues with Trump. Now, you would say he should just sit there and say, yes, sir. Those are 3 bags full, sir. But I think Swinney would do well to pass on some of the concerns that Scottish people have about Trump and his nonsense.
I think important to say some Scottish people, you know, Scotland is not a single homogeneous entity.
True.
There are many who do. I really don't like, you know, this the Greens have been out again talking about these mythical Scottish values that apparently we've all got to share if you want to be truly Scottish. You know, they don't exist in everyone. And as I always remember, remind people in this show that Donald Trump's a son of Scotland. He should be someone, perhaps that we should be lauding in this country as, the son of an immigrant, no less.
I think the German influence is stronger on Trump than the Scottish influence, frankly, because I think his old man was a mad fascist racist. So, I think that's more important to him than his mother. But what I would say is Trump's probably the most dangerous person on the planet. To let him just swan into Scotland without any sort of, cognizance being made of that would be wrong. And I also think that, there are people in Scotland that support Trump, just as there are people in Scotland who support reform. There are people, there is a broad range of views in Scotland. I'm not a Scottish exceptionalist. I don't think Scottish has any particular value other than just, but I do think the majority of people in Scotland think Trump's a loony.
On one of the issues, whiskey that you mentioned there and tariffs, obviously that is a very strong part of the Scottish economy, and country loses money because of tariffs. But Swinney will likely be meeting Trump in Aberdeen because that's where he'll be meeting Starmer with Stansteries, and we'll also be meeting Swinney there as well. Trump was on the news this week saying that Aberdeen is the oil capital of Europe. He's talking about, again, how we should be drilling more, drill baby drill, as they say in America, and getting rid of wind turbines. Do you think that's likely to be a bone of contention when the two meet?
I hope so.
I mean, if Donald Trump turns around and says, First Minister, why aren't you drilling for more oil? How does he handle that?
As with vaccines, as with climate change, as with almost anything where there's empirical evidence to show that Trump is wrong, he still insists he is right. He's wrong about climate change. Climate change is obviously here, and it's obviously contributed to by man-made activity. I mean, the science is unanswerable. Only Trump and a few loonies on the British right think that somehow we should just keep on drilling and keep on burning all the oil. Now, it's no up to Donald Trump to tell us what our energy policy should be. Frankly, if those big windmills spoil the view for rich golfers on Trump's estate, then I'm fine with that.
I think, though, for a start, the SNP's policy in North Sea oil and gas is all over the place. It's completely confused. I think Swinney might privately agree with Donald Trump that, we should be drilling, or at least we should be doing more to protect the industry as it is right now. Because no one's really answered the question of how we do this transition to kind of net zero.
No, you're right. The SNP
certainly haven't.
Yeah.
What I would also say is I think there's been a noticeable change in Donald Trump's presidency over the last couple of weeks. I wouldn't quite say we're getting serious, sensible Trump, but I think he's been less aggressive. I think he's been a bit more, shows a bit more understanding of maybe how he's viewed on the world stage. I think the stuff with these Epstein files are starting to show some splits in MAGA. A lot of his supporters are convinced there's this, mythical list with all these government names on it, notwithstanding the fact a lot of Democrats think Trump's name might be on it as well, but he seems to be...
Well, Trump was busy mates with Epstein. I think we're all clear on that, but let's go...
Again, I read something this week from quite a high-profile Democrat supporter in the US who was quite clear that for all Trump's faults, his relationship with Epstein probably isn't actually one of them. It probably wasn't actually that close. It probably wasn't. There is no smoking Trump gun with that. But he certainly seems eager to kind of move on to it, and I think it's because he feels it's a distraction. He seems to be. I mean, his thing with Putin. Obviously, we all know what 50. You've got 50 days, which actually in Trump speak means in 50 days will not do anything, but it gives us a chance to come up with something. But at least he's taken. He seems to be taking a more harder line with Putin. He seems to be keen to get some sort of ceasefire in Gaza. I just think there's been a wee sea change in him in the last few weeks. Maybe because he's he doesn't need his supporters anymore. He's actually been quite dismissive of his supporters in the past. He said he could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue and
Still get away with it.
So you think we'll get conciliatory, complimentary Donald when he turns up in Aberdeen? He's not going to be throwing any curveballs at the First Minister in press conferences, and he'll be talking more about great to be in Scotland, I love Scotland.
I think so.
And all the rest of it.
And he'll hail John Swinney. Oh, John Swinney's a great guy to do business with. I think that's what's happened. That's what's going to happen. Keir Starmer, great guy to do business with. I think we'll see conciliatory Donald next week. He'll be in a good mood. He'll get a few rounds at Turnberry and then a few rounds on his new course, the McCall course.
I hear there might be a few people trying to put a stop to that. We'll see what happens on the day.
I would just quickly say Andy Murray never get back to me about my challenge to him last week on this show for a round of golf. But so again, Andy, if you're listening, you name the time and place.
Just to move on to a slightly less, well, not cheerful, that'd be the wrong word, but more grim news in the economy. And inflation jumped to 3.6% today. It's the highest it's been since January 2024, and just adding to the general economic gloom that hangs over the UK and questions about Rachel Reeves and the Labour government's stewardship of the economy. Now, it was the last PMQs today before Westminster goes into recess. I'm sure quite a few of the Labour MPs on the Commons benches are only too grateful to get away in their summer holidays after there's been quite a few challenging few weeks for the UK government. But we've got a budget in the autumn, we've got public services crying out for investment, but we've got an extremely difficult financial picture. So one thing that has been thrown around a lot recently is the idea of a wealth tax. And what that means, kind of open to, what it doesn't can mean lots of things to different people, but Neil Kinnock, he put it as 2% on assets worth more than 10 million. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of well-heeled listeners to this podcast who may be affected by this. Personally speaking, I don't have 10 million in the bank. So there's, we'll see how things go. But is that wealth taxes, is that a serious, credible thing a Labour government can be doing, Mark, in 2025, do you think?
I'd say it's an absolute necessity. What we know from across the globe is that tax purely on income is great, by the way. Stick it up, right? Because tax is a great thing, as we all know. It pays for all the things we love, the health service, the schools, all the things that make life great are paid for by tax.
The crap rail.
At least we get some stuff. But no, at least you'd have none of that without tax. So let's just put that to bed. Tax is a great thing, right? I would whack up income tax on the rich. And if they want to leave the country, let them go and live in some godforsaken rock in the Caribbean where they might get their house blown over by a hurricane, or they could even go and live in the Isle of Man. So wherever they want to go, that's fine. Get lost. Wealth tax is great because it gets right into where the real inequality is. Inequality is not really in income. Inequality is in wealth and ownership.
Assets.
Now, if a Labour government can get to grips with that, it'll get absolutely slammed by the right-wing press, who always have a go at Labour anytime they try and nick any of their billions. But it would do more than anything else I've heard from Labour up to this point to properly address the inequality in society, which is worse than it was in Victorian times. We really need to get to grips with that as a culture, as a country, as a continent. We need to get to grips with that inequality, because that's the greatest challenge that we face as a political entity. We really need to get to grips with that. So it would be great. 2%, it's a nice start, and I agree with Neil Kinnock on that. I think he's spot on. Whether or not Rachel Reeves will see it that way, I don't know.
Dickie, do you think Rachel Reeves has the political capital, though, to push through something of that magnitude? I mean, she's going to have to do something to raise money, but...
Not right now, she doesn't. I mean, I have something in common with Rachel Reeves. I'm not an expert economist. But, I think I've always seen a wealth tax as one of these, it's a bit like the poll tax. It's a bit like communism. It's great in theory. In practice, there's a reason why only 4 serious economies in the world have a wealth tax. There's a reason why only one of them, Switzerland, raises significant money from it. There's a reason why the UK, even though it's been mooted before, has never had a wealth tax. The IFS are cool on it. They seem sceptical about it, about whether it would work. We know that capital flight is a real thing. We know that, there are people who are maybe asset rich but not cash rich. They may then need to sell.
Surely that would be good for the economy. If these asset rich
assets.
people have to liquidise those assets to pay that tax, and that's good for the economy because then it gets spent rather than just sitting in a bank account, which is probably offshore.
Well, another way to get the economy moving like that, get people spending, is to make sure they're giving, they're not giving as much money.
But that's
to
the problem with the super rich.
exchequer. But
they hoard their wealth.
we know
People, normal working class people, spend their money. The rich hoard it, and a lot of it isn't even invested properly. A lot of it is just sitting there in assets to be rented out. Doesn't really create a great deal of economic growth. That's why a wealth tax is good. It encourages people to get their.
But if it's so good, then why does no one else do it?
No, maybe they've not thought it yet. No. You know what? I think it would work really well in the UK because a lot of the UK's wealth is basically in the city of London, tied up in the massive wealth of high net worth individuals and high net worth companies. That should be targeted so that we can all benefit. And economic growth is the main problem Rachel Reeves faces. That's why she's had all these problems with winter fuel payment and all the rest of it. She needed economic growth so that she could tax it and then try and rescue Britain's absolutely wrecked public services, which I'm afraid the Tories left in a terrible state. So, it's the lack of economic growth, which I think has been Rachel Reeves' biggest problem. And I think a wealth tax could actually stimulate a bit of economic growth.
I mean, they seem to think that this 2% on assets over 2 million would raise, I think, 24 billion. 10 million, sorry. So if we talk about 24 billion, it also, I mean, it costs money to do this. So you need to spend money to work out what people's, what companies are worth, what assets are. It needs to be administered. Yes. 24 billion sounds like a massive amount of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not really.
That's a good argument for a higher tax load, again. Glad to hear that. Thank you.
So, I just think Rachel Reeves' problem is it's something that, I mean, it would be quite a revolutionary move. I wonder if she would consider a one-off,
like a windfall tax on energy
type thing, just to kind of, raise money in the short term. Mm-hmm. Whether she's got the.
I think it suits Rachel Reeves though right now for people like us to be talking about wealth taxes, because whether or not she brings them in, it means that we're not talking about how stubbornly high inflation is and how the cost of food is still, double what it was 2 years ago, because this is the thing that really annoys voters. Yeah. Now, they might not say this was caused by Labour, they might not blame Labour for it, but a lot of people who voted for Labour in 2024 thinking, well, we want change, we want the cost of living to come down, and, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have explained patiently, the grim economic inheritance they received. But ultimately, those excuses will wear off and voters will be like, well, it still cost me an arm and a leg just to fill the fridge every month.
The truth is, I mean, these prices are probably never going to come down. It's just if they can control the rate at which they grow, and Labour have failed to get to grips with that.
And the problem is as well that Rachel Reeves has been weakened by the two defeats that Labour have had to sustain on winter fuel payment and also the benefit changes. So it's a shame that Rachel Reeves finds herself in a position where she's not really strong enough at this moment to really take the radical measures I think she would like to, or that that Labour really should be making. I imagine Gordon Brown in his first year felt strong enough and powerful enough as Chancellor to do pretty radical things like independence for the Bank of England and all the rest of it. Sadly, Reeves just isn't in that position, and that's a pity. I think that is maybe why people are talking about a new Chancellor.
And absolutely. And when John Swinney was meeting reporters today, he was taking every opportunity to hammer home and remind Scots that number one, inflation is up, and also that fuel bills are up because a big Labour commitment. Although the key point here is Labour promised to lower fuel bills by 2030, and the SNP always leave out those words whenever they talk about this. They don't mention it by 2030, but bluntly speaking, most people will be like, well, he promised to lower bills, that hasn't happened yet. Why?
I take it John said independence was the solution for all this.
I didn't mention the word independence today, as he's been asked about a few things, one of which we're going to come on to now. And that is the case of Sandie Peggie, the nurse at NHS Fife. And just for a bit of background for listeners who may not be following this, but she was today cleared of any gross misconduct by NHS Fife. She was suspended from her role last year after she objected to a doctor who's a transgender woman from using female facilities. Sandy Peggy had faced allegations of misconduct, failures of patient care and misgendering her colleague, but NHS Fife has now said an internal hearing found there was insufficient evidence to support a finding of misconduct. Now, this comes as separately an employment tribunal in Dundee resumes after a 5-month break in proceeding. Now, Dougie, obviously this employment tribunal is continuing, but on a purely political sense, I get the feeling that John Swinney and the Scottish Government are a bit apprehensive about this and the ramifications of what it could mean if it blows up in their face. Because although it's NHS Fife, it's an employment tribunal, it's not the Scottish Government that are giving evidence here, but NHS Fife has said over and over again that when it comes to this, they were following guidance given to them by civil servants. So ultimately, this will become a political story. John Swinney was facing umpteen questions on it today. Didn't really say very much other than he's still got faith and confidence in the NHS Fife board. But how long can that line stick?
Well, Neil Gray's also, backed him much earlier in the process as well. And I think the simple fact for John Swinney is this is going to blow up in their face. I'm actually amazed NHS Fife are still continuing with this, given the Supreme Court ruling that we had earlier this year. I think everyone, I would be amazed if Sandy Peggy didn't win. I'd be amazed if she didn't get awarded some form of compensation. This is taxpayers' money. Once again, a public body under the auspices of the SNP, obviously the SNP don't run it, but SNP are running the country, so who are wasting money on another legal issue that they've got no chance of winning. And it completely beggars belief in some ways that it's still going on. I think Swinney and a lot in the SNP are maybe gambling on that this kind of transgender debate is still quite a niche issue. I think John Swinney would just hope this goes away. I don't think that's the case. I think I think Sandy Peggy is getting through. We can see it when we do stories about her. People are interested in this.
Just to give you one example, on the BBC website, which obviously has a UK-wide or even a Europe-wide audience, it was the second most read story on their website today, which I must admit I was surprised by, but does prove that there is an interest in this story beyond Fife and the East Coast of Scotland and even the UK really. But as I say, when he faced reporters earlier, he was asked about this over and over again, and I did detect a bit of apprehension about it.
He's right to be apprehensive. The evidence today, will be worrying for Swinney, is the diversity officer upon whom a lot of this apparent, policy was based, and a lot of it seemed to be based on what was essentially
basically just saying
against the law. Yeah. I mean, they were going against the law of the land. Remember, the Supreme Court didn't rule that was the situation from now. That was always the law. And the fact that NHS Fife were applying the law wrongly in the case of Sandy Peggy, it appears, we hear evidence today from the diversity officer at NHS Fife saying, well, hang on, because she's 27-year-old. Yeah. She's not a trained lawyer. She was there as a diversity officer. She was taking advice from other health boards and other senior figures within the health service. That's come out today. Now, it's a fairly chewy point, but it's an important point, because I think NHS Fife and John Swinney would like nothing better than to blame this poor diversity officer for the whole mess. They won't get away with that, because it's quite clear that this was from the top and it was wrong and it was against the law. I think NHS Fife would ever run a favour if they admitted they were wrong, apologised to Sandy Peggy, paid her a whack of money for what she's been through, and then the lot of them got sacked because they deserve nothing less.
I mean, I think that diversity officer started working as a contact tracer. That's how she got in the door, and she's been hung out to dry.
Yep.
She's been quite clear that, to term the phrase, I was just following orders. She's just following, guidance, policy and guidance that ultimately comes from the Scottish Government. And, and the government are still dragging their heels, waiting for, the EHRC to kind of rule on that, even though it's already got interim guidance. It doesn't want to do that.
I think we all know
I don't understand why they're...
I think Swinney's hidebound by the policies and the almost cult-like commitment that Nicola Sturgeon and her acolytes had on this issue. He's stuck with that because a lot of SNP supporters are still stuck in that rut. Now,
I mean, he did vote for it as well.
well, exactly. I don't think that Swinney's natural instincts are that there's such a thing as a gendered soul or anything like that. I think his natural instincts is that biological sex is real. I think he probably supports the Supreme Court ruling, but he's hidebound where he is now. And I think it'll be interesting to see how he manoeuvres the SNP into a more maybe amenable position, a position where they're not going to be quite so vulnerable on this issue. You know?
Does that not call into question John Swinney's trustworthiness then? And,
No,
and John Swinney's morals, given that he was happy to back Nicola Sturgeon?
Sometimes politics is utterly possible, you know, and I think Swinney instinctively knows where most people are on this issue and will get himself into that position.
Well, I think he does, yeah.
Should just add that when Swinney was asked about this today, his full quote was, "NHS has my confidence and support. They've got important work to do to deliver the healthcare needs the people of Fife, and that's what I expect them to do." So they have his confidence at the moment, but this isn't a ringing endorsement or a blank check. I mean, that confidence could crumble, and it may in the coming days and weeks.
As a Hearts fan, I've seen confidence given in managers many times, and it's lasted no longer than 24 hours sometimes. So, I think we all know what confidence means.
But opposition parties, I mean, you'll be no stranger, Dickie, to Tess White, who is a Scottish Conservatives Equality spokesman, and she said the decision today confirms what we've known all along. Sandy Peggy did nothing wrong, and she claims that NHS Fife's credibility lies in tatters, and senior bosses owe Sandy an immediate and unreserved apology. And I get that's what you think will happen. That's a bit.
I think ultimately that is what's going to happen. I think we're now this is just a complete charade. The rest of this. Look, I could end up with egg in my face. We could be in here in a few weeks' time, looking like mugs. But to the observer from the outside, it's very hard to understand how NHS Fife can come out of this without being humiliated. In all honesty, I find it very difficult to see, and thus by extension, the Scottish Government, whose guidance they were following.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably just about all we've got time for today. We've covered a lot of ground there, and by this time next week we could be discussing Donald Trump's invasion.
Donald Trump's swing.
Declaring Aberdeen as the latest state of the United States.
And let's see if he actually can play golf.
Yeah, well,
he is apparently not a bad player, but a few people have played with him. A few questionable, or just dip me down as a 5.
All it helps if you've got a very loyal caddy, and his caddy's been won 25 years or something.
He's got a very unique swing, but he does seem to move the ball all right. You say that.
He's probably with golf.
Yeah.
So thanks very much to Mark and Dickie for joining me. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Music. Watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast. So thanks again for listening, and we'll be back next week.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.